Good morning. How are you doing? Happy Thanksgiving. So glad you could join us. Just quick reminder, at the end of our service, we're going to have an update video of ministry and a financial update. We do this every year. And so I just invite you to stick around until the very end. We'll show you a brief video that will just give you an update as to where we are and where we're going and some of the challenges and the opportunities that we have before us. Well, again, happy Thanksgiving. This is typically the time of year when we pause to take inventory of our lives and remind ourselves that despite what is happening, we still have things to be thankful for. But, and I've heard of this quite a bit, but are you perhaps having a hard time being thankful this year? Now, today's message is really just a question. How do you stay grateful and strong when things go wrong? And I suspect that for some of you, your plans didn't work out the way you wanted. You're not where you wanted to be in your career, in your life, in your relationships. Even now, as you hear this, you may not be spending Thanksgiving with all the people you wanted to because of this pandemic. And at least for me, one of the most frustrating parts about all of this, and not just this circumstance, but others as well, is the fact that I have little to no control. And really, sometimes the lack of control is worse than the circumstance. After I graduated from Bible college, I was in debt. My wife, Catherine, had graduated from Teachers College, and she had a bit of a debt as well. She wasn't working. I was just getting over cancer. But the thing is, those were things that we could do something about, whether it was going to an oncologist, whether it was getting a job, whether it was saving, whether it was living in your parents' basement apartment as you just save. It wasn't ideal, but to some degree, we were in control. But how do you stay positive in the storms that you can't control? I was reading some articles just this past week about this subject. And many of these articles said that the solution to being grateful and strong when things go wrong is to simply be thankful. So when you feel overwhelmed, just be thankful. When you get a scary diagnosis, just be thankful. But is it like that? Can you just be thankful and be grateful and strong when things go wrong? I think we intuitively know that thankfulness has to work in the real world because that's where you live. And sometimes when I read these blogs or hear these supposed professionals speak, I wonder, and I think you wonder too, what world do you guys live in? Because in the real world, you can't just think something and be it. Now, in defense of the professionals, in defense of the bloggers and the doctors and the YouTubers and et cetera, there is one thought that I kept hearing and reading over and over and over again that I absolutely agree with. You have to keep moving forward, because when you stop moving forward, the frustration or the fear or the despair, or maybe even some combination of all these, start to set in. But moving forward is not the same as busy work. God said in the book of Jeremiah to his people Israel, but really to us as well, "For I know the plans I have for you. They are plans for good and not disaster, to give you a future and a hope." God has good plans for you. He has a purpose and a hope for you. It's not just busy work. It's meaningful, purposeful work. And so you can't stop, but rather you have to pivot. You have to learn. You have to grow. But here's the question that maybe you're thinking. It's the question that we're talking about today. How do you stay grateful and strong when things go wrong? How do you pivot and be strong when things go wrong? How do you learn and grow and be strong when things go wrong in the storms of life? Now, in our text that we're about to read, the Apostle Paul, experienced a lot of wrong, experienced some some real storms as well. Now, Paul's purpose in life, you may not be able to relate to what his specific purpose is, but I think you can relate to at least the desire to wanting to know your purpose. Well, he knew his purpose in life. His purpose in life was to tell people about the good news of Jesus Christ. But 2 years before the passage that we're about to read, he was arrested for telling people about the good news of Jesus Christ. Now, the thing about Paul was that he was a Roman citizen, so he had the right to appeal his case before Caesar. Now, this is a great opportunity for two reasons. One, he could actually become free after appealing his case. And two, it meant an opportunity to share his faith with the most powerful person in the world. And so as he sailed on this ship as a prisoner to Rome to appeal his case, something went wrong. And this is what Acts 27 says. We'll read a couple of verses from chapter 27, starting at verse 13. "When a light wind began blowing from the south, the sailors thought they could make it." You ever think that to yourself? I think I can make it. I think I can take it. I think we can make it. And so they pulled up anchor and sailed close to the shore of Crete. But then the weather changed abruptly, and a wind of typhoon strength burst across the island and blew us out to sea. That ever happened to you, by the way? The wind just blew abruptly. A circumstance just abruptly changed. That's the thing about the storms in real life and the storms in our relationships, our homes, or our careers. You never see them coming, right? You never thought you'd be doing a career change. You never thought you'd be raising your kids alone. You never thought you'd be on EI. You never thought that this circumstance would become the new normal. And this is what they did in this text. Verse 19 picks up and says, the sailors couldn't turn the ship into the wind. There was nothing they could do. So they gave up and let it run before the gale. The terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars, until at last all hope was gone. And even though it's describing a storm at sea, there's an eerie similarity to how perhaps you and I have felt at times. All hope is gone. There's just no point. Just give up. Now, it's in this moment, the Apostle Paul is on the ship, and he called the crew together, and he told them that in the middle of the night, in the middle of this storm, an angel actually visited them. And this is what he said in verse 23. For last night, an angel of God, to whom I belong and whom I serve, really important point, stood beside me, and he said, don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. Paul knew to whom he belonged, and he knew where he was going and why he was going there. See, he actually looked at his context through the lens of his calling, not the lens of comfort and convenience. And maybe that's the problem sometimes. We look at our lives through the lens of our pleasure, of a specific moment, instead of the lens of purpose, of a divinely appointed destination. And so his angel's telling Paul this, and he's telling the crew. And then he goes on to say, what's more, God in his goodness has granted safety to everyone sailing with you. So take courage, for I believe God, it will be just as he said. Even though you're not in control, even though you've lost things you didn't count on losing, even though you've encountered hardship you weren't prepared for, there's still hope. Now, all that's easier said than done, because the question still stands, how do you stay grateful and strong when things go wrong? How do you be thankful in the storm? And I think you understand what I'm about to say. Even if you don't believe in God, I think you would agree that your answer to this question, your answer will radically affect your family. It will radically affect the people you love. It will radically affect your friendships for better or worse. So how do you stay grateful and strong when things go wrong? Now, here's the truth. There's really just one thing I want to say today. It's the one thing that Paul said to the sailors. But before he said that one thing, the sailors had to experience some things. And I think today, before I say this one thing that I'd really like to leave with you, there's a couple of things I'd like to kind of explain. And it's really, these thoughts are what the sailors themselves experienced in the storm. And here's one of the things they experienced. There's a difference between holding something together and delaying the inevitable. It was our son's birthday this past week. He just turned 6 years old, and we usually try to buy gifts that they can share because there's 4 of them, and not everyone's going to get their own iPad because there just isn't enough space or money. And so we bought these magnetiles. They're magnetic blocks. They're magnetic shapes. They come in shapes of like squares, big squares, small squares, triangles, and whatnot. And they love them. In fact, every couple of days, they will create these amazing masterpieces out of these magnetic blocks. But, and if you have kids, you already know where I'm going. Every couple of days, they build a masterpiece. And I'm telling you, like as an adult, I am just amazed at the creativity. But every couple of days, they build a masterpiece and they do not want anyone to touch it. So my son or one of my daughters will build something and they'll say, I've used like 89% of the blocks and this is my mansion, it's my boat, it's my whatever. No one touch it. No one clean around it. In fact, what they'll do is they'll take the cushions from the couch and they'll start putting it around their creation in the hopes of keeping it safe. Now, while that sounds cute and sounds like something that kids do, it's actually not unlike what we do as adults. We work to build a life, and then we do all that we can to protect it. Like we acquire assets and then we try to protect those assets. Now, granted, we probably don't use cushions from the couch, but we do use insurance. We use fences and garage doors. We lock our doors at nighttime. But the older you get, there is a sobering truth that starts to sink in. There's a difference between holding something together and delaying the inevitable. Because it doesn't matter how much insurance you buy or how healthy you eat. It will all come undone in the end. In fact, even in this text, it was starting to come undone. Verse 17 says this, that the sailors bound ropes around the hull of the ship to strengthen it, because every wave beating against the hull was a reminder that they weren't in control. But there was a transition point. See, they were trying to keep it together, but there was a transition point in their thinking, because they went from tying ropes around the hull to realizing all hope was lost. They thought they were trying to hold it together, but in reality, and they realized this, they were just delaying the inevitable. Does it ever feel like that for you? Does it feel like your life is all about delaying the inevitable? Or are you just watching right now and you're just watching your dreams fall apart during this season? Are you just watching a relationship fall apart? And because you think there's nothing you can do, like these sailors, you eventually stop trying to keep your life together and just watch it slowly unravel. But in this text, and I'm convinced in your context, there is still hope. Hope was not lost for them, and it's not lost for you. In fact, it was only when they lost control that they began to realize that someone else was in control. In fact, sometimes you need to run out of rope to see that there's a better hope. The Bible says in the book of Colossians that Christ holds all things together. In him, all things find their being, meaning he can hold you together if you let him. Or you can buy and barter and trade or steal as many ropes as you think you can, and you can wrap them all around your life and your ship and your home. You can save as much as you can, eat as healthy as possible. But sometimes you have to run out of rope to realize there's a better hope. Sometimes you have to lose your possessions before you give God your attention. Sometimes the rope in your life you think you need to hang on to the life you've built is actually getting in the way of what you desperately need to hear and experience. Now, Paul said something to these sailors we didn't read, but he said something, and it wasn't about guilt. It wasn't an I told you so moment, even though it kind of sounds like one. After all hope was gone, after they've given up, the ropes are gone, the ship's fallen apart, this is what Paul said. Men, you should have listened to me in the first place. Don't you love it when people just tell you that? Not really, right? You should have listened to me and not left Crete. You would have avoided all this damage and loss. Like, don't you hate it when someone says that? Now, but here's a question though. Have you ever had an I should have moment in your life? I should have studied harder. I should have saved more. I should have said less. I should have said a lot less. I should have spent more time with the people I love. I mean, what do you do when your I should have moments outweigh your I'm glad I did moments? And seeing as how this is a church and it's a sermon, have you ever had I should have moments in your faith? See, in this pandemic, we've all been forced to slow down. And in some capacity, the reduced speed has increased reflection. And in your reflecting, you've realized that your faith isn't where it should be. And maybe like these sailors, you've been too busy sailing, too busy working, too busy making money, too busy with all these other things, too busy maybe even with the storms in your life to notice that there is something bigger and better beyond the horizon. Now, something happened in their storm. Something happened in their I should have moment. Verse 23 says, for last night an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve, I see stood beside me. Now, in the middle of all that, God sent an angel. But they weren't listening at first. They were too busy working. They were too busy surviving. And then when they knew they were dying, they learned that God was supplying. They had to lose their possessions before they gave God their attention. They waited for an I should have moment to actually give God a moment. And here's where you need to take hope. I believe that God still sends angels into I should have moments in your life. So if you're in an I should have moment in your life right now where you're thinking, I should have done this, I should have done that, I should have saved this, I should have said that, I should have went there, I shouldn't have went there. I don't know what kind of moment you've found yourself in, but you have to keep believing that there is a miracle that's possible in the mess of this moment. And you have to do this. This is something actually you cannot afford to do. Something I've seen a lot. In fact, I've seen it quite a bit during this pandemic. Don't be lukewarm in the storm. There is a time to grapple with questions like, where was God and why did this happen? And I do not want to diminish those questions in any way, shape, or form. But I think some of us know that the real problem is not philosophical or some theological question. I think some of us know that the real problem is that you've been lukewarm in the storm. You've been lukewarm for weeks, months, years. I wouldn't be surprised if there's someone watching and you've been lukewarm in your faith for decades. And here's, I think, the real tragedy in all of that. There is a breakthrough. And this breakthrough, it's not just for you. It starts with you, but it's not just for you because it will affect everyone around you. You've likely heard the phrase, a rising tide lifts all boats. When your faith truly rises, it actually blesses people around you. Because remember what God said to Paul. Paul, you're not the only one in the storm. And by me moving in your life, the lives of others will be blessed through the storm. Just this past week, I had a lot on my mind. You know, pastors typically think a lot. They carry a lot on their shoulders, whether it's a big church, small church, medium church. They do carry a lot on their shoulders. And so I remember it was, I think Monday or Sunday night. It was raining, but I didn't care. I went for a run at about 8, 9 o'clock, and I ran till about 10. And not that I'm a great runner. There was a lot of walking in there too. And it was raining, and I honestly, I didn't care because I just had a lot on my mind, and I just ran. And we live in a cute little neighborhood, emphasis on the little, and I don't really know our neighborhoods very well, but I was just running, and all of a sudden I looked up and I thought, wow, these houses got really big, and the grass got really green, no weeds, the cars got really shiny. But as I was running and looking, I really felt God say something to my heart. In fact, it was so strong what I felt he was saying to me in my heart that I stopped and I took out my phone and I just typed it out. But this is what I believe he told me. There are unseen storms in people's homes like never before. There are unseen storms in people's homes like never before. There's a storm happening in a home right now. And it doesn't matter how big the house is or how fancy the car is or how small the house is. There's a storm happening in a family right now. And the truth is, there are storms in your life too. But is it possible for your breakthrough to have an impact on the storms all around you? Is what happened to Paul and those sailors, is it possible for that to happen today? This is what God said through Paul. But God in his goodness has granted safety to everyone sailing with you. Meaning Paul's breakthrough was the reason everyone else made it through. Now, the text doesn't say that they all put their faith in God. That's between them and God. But it does say that they were all saved. They were all blessed. and the question is, does that happen today? I think of, the GTA and our church in the middle of all that. Does, or maybe the better word is, will the goodness of God overflow out of our church and make a difference in the storms all around us? Because if it does, take courage. For I believe God, and it will be just as he said. This is the time for courageous faith to rise up. It's the time for us to believe again. Man, if you called Heartland your home, I have a bit of a challenge for you. It's a strange challenge, but hear me out. We have 2 months to go before we enter our new church building at 1100 Canadian Place. It's so exciting, and you're going to get pictures of it, every couple of weeks. And Lord willing, we'll be able to give you guys a bit of a sneak peek before our opening Sunday. But before we do that, there's something that I know that's happening to many believers all across the globe, all across North America, and our church and our community isn't immune. I think the faith of some has started to wane. The faith of some has started to become lukewarm. And in these final 2 months, here's what I'd like you to do. This is the time to reconnect. This is the time to recommit. This is the time to reinvest. This is the time to re-engage. This is the time to take courage and believe that the goodness of God will go before us. But here's the question that we've been talking about. In the middle of all this, in the middle of this pandemic, how do you stay grateful and strong when things go wrong? And here's the one thing that I wanted to share with you. It's something that flies in the face of modern psychology and counseling principles. Not that I don't value human wisdom, but this isn't about wisdom or wishful thinking. If you haven't experienced this, I invite you to open your heart to it. Thankfulness is not just a mindset. It's the goodness of God in your context. His presence still goes before us. His presence still surrounds us. God is still sending angels into storms today. Your faith is not wishful thinking. If faith were wishful thinking, I would not have made it to today. I would have given up a long time ago. God is still showing up and doing the incredible. But if this is true, if it's really, really true, there are some things that you and I may need to do. And here's just a few. I need to do a better job of managing my mindset. Because Paul heard the waves, he heard the thunder, he heard the sailors, he heard the sounds of panic, he heard the sounds of hopelessness, but he didn't let his context manage his mindset. You have a choice what you decide to entertain. You can entertain anxiety, or you can entertain anticipation that God is going to do something incredible. You can entertain fear, or you can invest in faith. You can entertain panic, or believe that the presence of God is going to show up and do the incredible. Because if it's true, if he really does show up, I need to do a better job of what I let into my mind. And you also need to know that your context doesn't stay your context for very long. These sailors didn't believe. Paul believed, and they were saved. Odds are your coworkers don't believe. Odds are that at least some of your family members don't believe. But when God pours out his goodness in your life, it overflows to people around you. And I'm convinced beyond the shadow of any doubt that our church has an unprecedented opportunity to see the goodness of God overflow in our neighborhoods and our community around us, and even the GTA. But there is something you have to do. Something maybe you've already done, something you've contemplated doing, something you know you need to do, but you just set it aside. You got to wake up. Why not let today be your wake-up call? I don't know where you are in your faith. Maybe you've let bitterness slowly chip away at that faith foundation in your life. Maybe you're just hanging on. But in the middle of the night, God sent an angel to wake Paul up and remind him that he is still good and he still leads people through the darkest nights of their soul. And so, church, as we prepare to sing and worship and pray, let this song about the goodness of God be a reminder that because of him, you can be grateful and strong through the storm.